It's Melody Brooke here. Sorry, I'm a couple of minutes late. I had to delete Facebook and put it back on because for some reason it wasn't allowing me to do a Facebook Live. So I'm talking about a really difficult topic today, and one that touches most of us, it seems like these days, which is the topic of suicide, hygiene. So I know it's not a topic that people really want to have to talk about, but as it has touched so many of us, I think it's a really important topic. Hi, Christina. If you have been affected by suicide, please talk about it below if you feel like it. If you have any awareness of what happened, if you don't, that's okay too. So I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I think cause people, hi Peter, to jump off into suicidality. And next week I'll talk a little bit about some things that we can do that are found to be really helpful with people who have suicidal thoughts or who have suicidal tendencies. So I want to talk about depression, and because depression often goes along with suicidality, it is not always a key. But it is one of the things that is sort of a danger sign for somebody who potentially could become suicidal. Depression doesn't always lead to suicidality, but it doesn't always accompany suicidality, oddly enough. But suicide and depression are linked because obviously if a person is in enough pain, sometimes they get to the point where they don't see any way out. There's a lot of data about hi Beverly, about suicide, and why suicide is increasing these days is not really terribly obvious. I know it's increasing a lot with hi Christy, with younger people, and our teenagers, it seems like, are particularly vulnerable, especially teenage boys. But depression is acted out differently in hi back Beverly. It affects boys particularly differently than it does girls. Girls tend to be more obviously depressed. They are sad, flat affect, don't want to do anything, become withdrawn, isolate. With boys, sometimes it can look very differently than that. So part of that is because boys have such a difficult time, hi Paul, expressing their feelings in a way that allows them to feel comfortable letting them out. And so they'll come, with boys, they tend to act out with their depression rather than inward. Hi Gail. Hi Lee. So with boys, it's a little trickier because they don't always on the surface appear to be depressed. What you might see is, hi Santa, is anxiety. You might see anger. You might see oppositional defiant behavior. You might see drug abuse. You might see risky behavior where they start driving fast, doing reckless things. Those are some indications of depression with boys. Now, I'm not saying that girls don't also do those things, because they do, but boys are more likely to express depression in that way. So when we are looking at our boys, I think we have to be particularly sensitive and aware of that. Hi, Stephanie. So suicidality obviously has a lot of different causes, but depression is clearly one of them. For people who have difficulty managing to pull themselves out of depression, suicide can become something that is what seems like a valid option to them. And one of the things I know about depression is that it tends to be anger turned inside. It can also be, as I said, with boys, anger turned outside, but which is why it doesn't look like depression. But what basically is happening is that our old brain, which I've talked a lot about, some of you may be familiar with, that reptilian brain. This is a model of your brain. We have a brain stem which is where our fight, flight, freeze, automatic reflex, survival reflex lives, and it's what we have in common with reptiles or lizards. That's why it's called the reptilian brain or the lizard brain. And when we get triggered to a place where we don't feel like we can get out, because often when we're triggered into that place, we first of all feel like a victim or potential victim, and we feel that overwhelm, that stress, that sense of despair and hopelessness that is so terrible, that's really ultimately what depression is, right? But most of the time we'll find a way to manage that by flipping into rescue mode or self-protect mode. And but what will happen with suicidality is that we get trapped. We get where we don't feel like the rescuing isn't working, the pleasing, placating, trying to take care of other people isn't getting us out of the state that we're in. Attacking or shutting people out isn't getting us out of our feeling state. We don't feel like there's an option. Hi, Christine. And when that happens, we get sort of stuck in that victim place. We get stuck in the distorted thinking of that victim mindset. So when that happens, then we just kind of collapse into ourselves, and we start feeling just horrible feelings that we just really cannot by ourselves manage to get out of a lot of times, because what happens is that our brain will start telling us, well, just kill yourself, that's the end, that'll take care of it. Hi, Susan. So when we get into that spot, when our old brain is taking charge, and we're just going down this spiral of thinking of that it feels like there's no way out except for suicide seems like the only way out. And that is a lie that our brain tells us. It is never the only way out, but it is part of what happens, the distortion that happens when we're flooded with those emotions and we feel that trapped, which is why sometimes it will happen really quickly. I've actually lost a couple of people to suicide in my practice, both of whom were kind of surprises, although in retrospect, I guess they shouldn't have been. But one of them was a young man who had a history of drug abuse, and hi, Joe, and he was having a breakup with his girlfriend, and he just literally could not tolerate the feelings that he was having. Hi, Greg. And then did a suicide by cop thing, and very heartbreaking incident that happened. Hi, Karen. Hi, Kimberly. And so what had happened was that he had gotten into that place of complete and total despair where he didn't see that there was any way out. And I think there's, going back to causes of some of the things that cause people to become suicidal, sometimes, and I think more often than not, it has to do with a romantic problem. There's some kind of a breakup or a perceived rejection, and that's what happened, at least in both of the cases that I experienced, was a young man who didn't see that he could survive without this person in his life. Hi, Kay. And a young woman, again, who she was going through a breakup. She was trying to do a major life transformation at the same time that she was involved with this person, and she had pissed him off, hurt his feelings, and so she didn't feel like there was any option but to do herself in, because she didn't see how she could move forward without this person in her life. So one of the warning signs is somebody who is already having emotional difficulties, and then you add to that a romantic difficulty, and it can make them a pretty high risk for suicidality. That's obviously not true of everyone, but that is one of the, oftentimes one of the causes. I worked for many years with people who really were in deep depressions, and we're really dealing with suicidal thoughts on a daily basis, and we're dealing with self-harm thoughts on a daily basis. And it wasn't until I started working with couples that I actually lost some people. So I do know that some of those people that I was working with ended up passively suiciding, which means they did not care about themselves enough to do the things they needed to do to keep themselves alive. And that's another kind of suicide that we don't really talk about a whole lot. So Hey, Christy. So some of the causes are obviously depression, getting stuck in that distorted thinking that old brain does, and which I think is the undercurrent that causes depression. I mean suicidality across the board, but there's lots of triggers for that. Sometimes the triggers are things like job loss. Job loss and self-esteem loss can also affect suicidality. So I'm sure that some of you have some personal experience with those thoughts. If you're willing to share them with me, you can share them with me privately. If you don't feel comfortable sharing them here, I understand that. Or if you've had an experience of losing someone through suicidality, you can reach out to me through private messaging or on here. I'd be happy to respond to you there. So the biggest problem being that we have this problem that we will get triggered into that old brain reactive place where we feel trapped in that old brain victim place, and the distortions that we start having in our thinking overwhelm our ability to think logically. And then we have what's called a psychic split that happens, because normally a person could not suicide. They could not do what it takes to suicide without a part of them that is suicidal taking over the part of them that has a survival reflex, because we all have that survival reflex. So we all have a part of us that pushes us to survive. But in order to have that survival reflex be overpowered by the part of us that wants to die, that part of us that wants to die sort of ends up taking over. It's almost like a dissociation of sorts, where we fall so far down into a pit of despair that we lose connection with the logical, rational part of ourselves that is hopeful and wants more for our lives. That part of us that is suicidal begins to take control over the system, and we lose our ability to keep ourselves safe. And that can be so despairing for people who are working closely with somebody who loves somebody who is voicing suicidality. But in my experience, a lot of times the people that actually suicide never really voice it. I know some do, and thank God they do, because they're more likely to get the help, right? Because they are crying out for help. I see teenagers and young people and people who have a lot of trauma and a lot of intense anxiety and depression that are aware that suicidal thinking is not natural, not logical, not rational. So they just had a call coming in. So when they reach out for help, then there's a potential for getting them that help and helping them process and helping them change those distortions. Hi, Susie. And when we're working with somebody who has those who's voicing those suicidal thoughts, it's really, really important to help them understand that, hi, Carlos, that their thinking is distorted. It's not logical. It's not rational. But that is that irrational, illogical thinking process that old brain has is what drives the suicidal behavior. And unfortunately, when we have people who are not willing to share what's going on inside of them for whatever reason, maybe they're too proud, maybe they're realizing that if they say something, somebody will try to stop them, and so they don't share it. And when they don't share it, it becomes very difficult, especially since some people, once they've made the decision, they appear better, right? They will appear as if they're doing better than they were. Maybe they were depressed at some point, and then suddenly there's a shift and they seem happy, and they I've heard stories of people making trips to see family, going out and give. Now, of course, obviously, everybody knows that one of the signs of a suicidal person is a person who's giving away a lot of their things. So, but that can be a real trick because they're happy and they're being generous and they're appearing to not have a concern for anything, and so you think that they seem at peace, right? But what can happen is that distorted thinking can make them think that the way to peace is to kill themselves, and then they act on it, and nobody even realizes that was happening because they were so at peace. I've seen that happen more than once. It happened to a young man. He wasn't my client, but he was a client. Hi, Donna. But he was a client that I worked with his brother in treatment back several years ago. Hi, Victoria. So I would love to hear any of y'all's thoughts, questions, concerns about that. I know one of the things that makes it really hard for people is that they don't understand how a person could get to that kind of thinking. And I want you to think back to the last time you were stuck in a problem where you just didn't feel like there was a way out, and how distorted your thinking can become. And when a person has a lot of trauma in particular, or they are particularly trapped, say they're young enough that they don't have a lot of options, or they have a lot of responsibilities and they don't see the way out. A lot of times I see men who are family men who appear to have everything going. They have a beautiful family, they have a nice house, they have children, they have a loving wife, and you wonder what could have driven that man to have done himself in. Well, sometimes there are conflicts that we have inside of us that we don't feel like we can share with other people, because if we do, then it can destroy other people's lives, right? Maybe that person happened to actually be homosexual, and they were in this relationship with this person that looked on the surface really perfect. Maybe they were dealing with some kind of depression and they weren't able to articulate it, and maybe they were having some kind of job failure where they felt like they were going to let their family down in such a big way that they could not face the consequences of that, and they didn't understand that just because men in particular feel that their value is in the money that they can produce and the ability that they have to be the breadwinner for their families. So when those things are affected, men in particular can feel like there's no other option, because they think about, well, there's life insurance and my family will be better off. And because we raise, and I'm talking a lot about men, because of the fact that by far the most successful suicides happen by men. Men are far more susceptible to actually completing their suicide than women are. Not that women don't, obviously they do. One of my clients was a female. But men are more likely to actually act on suicidal thought. And I think that's largely because they are afraid to speak about what they feel, because men are raised in such a way as to not be given not only the opportunity to talk about how they're feeling, but they're not even given the words to express them. Something I see in my practice every day are men who come in and their wives feel like they're not emotionally available. They feel like they can't, they don't understand what's going on with their husbands. Their husbands don't know how to respond to their emotions. They don't know how to express their own emotions. So men are not even given the tools to express their feelings, let alone manage them, because in our culture, men are supposed to just suck it up, and the only emotion that men are allowed to express is anger, which is, I think, why a lot of times depression looks more like anger outbursts in men than it does depression. So if you see a man who is highly angry, we have this tendency to look at them as being the bad guys, the controllers, the control freaks, the bullies. But oftentimes, those are the very people who are in the most pain and who are more vulnerable to potential of a suicide because of the fact that they don't know how to express their softer feelings. They have not been given the tools, the outlets, the ability to express themselves. So I know I'm covering a lot really fast here, but some of the other causes of suicide, I think, of course, are also when there is a chemical imbalance. Sometimes that can cause that to happen. Hi, Phoebe. There are also people who have traumatic brain injury, and their thinking gets skewed because of the traumatic brain injury. Their brains don't function quite well enough, and they get trapped in that suicidal thinking because they're literally unable to perceive of things differently. I think the hardest thing for a person who is surviving someone who's suicided is that we have this tendency to try to figure out why it happened and what we could have done differently. And I think it's really important, and I know this wasn't really the topic today, but it's really important to recognize that we cannot control what another person is going to do, no matter how much we want to, no matter how much we love them, no matter how much we care for this person. We cannot predict or control what they're going to do. I've had friends who have lost children to suicide. I've had 2 friends who lost daughters to suicide, which is, again, women, not just men. And in both of these cases, the mom was doing everything she possibly could have done to try to protect her child. One mother had taken her daughter to the hospital, had been gone through treatment with her, had her out from treatment, and that night she suicided that night while she was home. So there was nothing she could have done differently. And another had been by her daughter's side for years, helping her in and out of treatment, helping her with her family, and she thought her daughter was finally in a place where she was happy and could continue on her life. And for some reason that only she knows, she could no longer cope. So understanding that a lot of times we will not know why a person suicided. In fact, there's just probably the majority of the times we don't understand the illogic of that thinking that got that person to that place. Now, I also just read recently that there is a rise in the suicide of elderly people, and I believe that seniors are often suiciding now because living on a fixed income, and even with Medicare and Medicaid, often they do not have the financial resources to address their physical illnesses, or they don't have enough resources to actually manage their physical surroundings. That with cuts in federal aid, like food stamps, that can cause a person to feel pretty hopeless. And older people are also already dealing with feeling very lonely, because the older you are, the more of your friends and family have died. And so you're not only dealing with the burden of trying to survive when you have very little income, and managing to get your health care needs met on very little income, and not getting federal resources or state resources to help you, and then on top of that the isolation that older people often feel. That is often so I want you to realize that there are some warning signs, but they're not always obvious, and they're not always you're not always able to intervene. I think a lot of times we think that we can intervene. I mean, like I said, I had 2 clients that it happened so quickly that unfortunately I had no time to really help and intervene in that situation, and it breaks my heart. And believe me, it's something that I've gone over and over and over many, many times, trying to understand, trying to second guess myself. And yet I have to know that I did everything I knew how to do. And I think that we have to be kind with ourselves and recognize that we honestly can only do so much, because a person once they've made up their mind, they're going to do it. They're going to do it, and there's nothing anybody can do. When I was working in the hospital setting, I had it wasn't my client, but someone that was in the hospital at that time that actually was on one-on-one. That means they had a tech or a nurse who was with them constantly to make sure that they were safe. And they had a tech that was outside of their door when they were going to the bathroom, and they managed to hang themselves in the bathroom. So when a person has decided they're going to suicide, there really isn't anything you can do. Hi, Alvin. So be accepting of yourself. If you have lost someone to suicide, please know that you did everything you could do. And I know it doesn't seem like that's possible because that person is no longer here. But seriously, if somebody has decided they're going to do themselves in, they're going to do themselves in, and there's nothing anybody can do to stop it. All we can do is begin to recognize the signs when we see them, recognize the situations that are more prone to allow that to happen. Because believe me, it's something that I do talk about with all of my couples across the board now, because it is a real risk when you're dealing with relationships, because relationships matter so much to us. They are really what make our life worth living. Often is the depth of our relationships, and when we start losing those relationships, we can sometimes be in danger of getting stuck in that victim thinking, where we go in that spiral and just think horrible things. And I will share with you, if you are one of those people who have ever had those suicidal thoughts, and I have to admit that there have been times in my life when I have had those thoughts. That doesn't mean I've ever considered acting on them, because I haven't, but I've had those thoughts. My old brain has triggered into that thought. Hi, Dawn. So when that does happen, if it does happen that you get stuck in that spiral, spinning out of control, where you're thinking these negative thoughts about yourself, and you get way, way down to where you just don't feel like there's any options, and your old brain just jumps in, hi, Kathy, and starts telling you what it thinks that you have as a way out, which is a distorted point of view. Hey, Phoebe says, good job. Tough topic, yes. All right. Okay. Well, I will be back here, Phoebe, and you can come back and see this. I'll have it on my homepage. I'll also have it on my Melody Brooke LPC LMFT page. It's a little easier to find there because there's not as much. I don't post as much there. And it's on the Oh Wow, This Changes Everything Facebook page as well. So I want to get back to what I have discovered helps me get out of that spiral, and I've seen it help other people, because our thoughts have such a huge impact on how we feel, how we think, and the directions that we choose to take with our behavior. So if we can start to recognize when we're being triggered into that negative spiral. For me, I began to recognize it earlier rather than later, so that I didn't have to go as far down before I started implementing this method. But this method is very powerful for me personally, and I will share it with you because I have found it to be also powerful and helpful for my clients, which is a mantra, which is, I like myself, I love myself, I am responsible for my present and my future. It sort of brings you to this current moment and stops the beating up about everything that you've done before, because you can't do anything about what's happened before. A lot of times mistakes or perceived mistakes or old slights on other people or something that we feel like we have done incorrectly, badly, poorly, kind of flood our thinking and prevent us from feeling or being able to recognize anything good about ourselves. So when we get trapped into that sort of negative spiral of thought process, if we can stop it, by saying that mantra. And I say as a mantra, I like myself, I love myself, I'm responsible for my present and my future. Takes you into the forward, takes you into the moment, takes you into what's ahead of you rather than keeping you stuck in what's behind you, what the mistakes you might have made or ideas you have about terrible things you might have done. All of that gets pushed to the back. And what you do is you just say those things in your head or out loud if you're in private, but say it over and over and over again. Even if you don't believe it, you don't have to believe it. It just is a process of stopping your thoughts and moving your thoughts into a different direction. So if you say it over and over and over again, just repeatedly, until that thought process, that negative train of thought stops and can move you into a different way of thinking about yourself and your circumstances, because it's that distorted thinking of the old brain that gets us stuck in that thought process that takes us down into that spiral. Hi, Karen. So if you know anybody who has a tendency to get suicidal, or to get depressed, or get stuck into a shame spiral, or whatever, if you could share that with them, it might be helpful for them. I don't know. Hopefully this is helpful for you. It has made a huge difference for me personally and for some of my clients. So that's it for today. Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed having all of you here. I hope it was worth your time. And if you want to know more about me, you can find me at melodybrooke.com. Also, I have a YouTube channel. And I have a book. It's called Oh Wow, This Changes Everything. Hi, Kathy. And it is on Amazon. You can get a Kindle version and an Audible version. Please, if you have thoughts or questions, hi, Ken, please put them below or private message me. I'd be happy to talk with you. So I will talk to you later. I'll see you this Thursday at 4 at 4 with the 4 at 4, and then next Monday at 4. See you then. Bye.